Good evening again, football fans. Big Al here on this late Tuesday night, November 4th, 2025. Unless you're on the East Coast, it's already Wednesday, November 5th. All right, this is our first look at the playoff races in both the AFC and NFC entering Week 10 of the 2025 NFL season. And I will be going in depth with these at the end of the week that was, beginning next week. So I just wanted to get this one out tonight. That way you'll have a clue on who's in the playoffs and who's not. Alright, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell and get notified every time I go live. And here we go with the NFL playoff picture going into week number 10. Starting in the AFC, there's a three-way tie at the top of the conference with the Indianapolis Colts, New England Patriots, and Denver Broncos. All three teams have a 7-2 record. Alright, Indianapolis is 2-0 versus the South and 6-1 in the AFC with a 429 strength of schedule and a 361 strength of victory. In the number 2 spot right now is the New England Patriots, also 7-2, 2-0 versus the East, 4-2 in the AFC, 355 strength of schedule and 333 strength of victory. They are your AFC East leaders. Your AFC West leaders are the Denver Broncos, sitting in the 3 spot, also 7-2, 0-1 in the division and 4-2 in the conference. They have a 417 strength of schedule and 325 strength of victory. And once I read off all the teams, I'll run down all the tiebreakers. And then the 4 seed presently is the NFC North leader, or rather the AFC North leaders, the Pittsburgh Steelers, coming in with a record of 5-3. They are 1-1 versus the North and 4-1 against the AFC. They have a 530 strength of schedule and 500 strength of victory. So as of right now, those would be your 4 division leaders in the AFC. Indianapolis Colts number 1 sitting on top of the AFC South. They got the New England Patriots, your AFC East leaders, in the number 2 spot. The Denver Broncos from the AFC West in the number 3 spot. And the Pittsburgh Steelers of the AFC North in the number 4 spot. As it sits right now, your 3 wildcard teams would be the Buffalo Bills, Los Angeles Chargers, and Jacksonville Jaguars. Alright, the Chargers, or rather the Bills I should say, they have the number 5 seed, or the top wildcard, with a 6-2 record. 2-1 record versus the East, 4-1 versus the AFC, 391 strength of schedule, 327 strength of victory. The second wild card, or the number 6 seed, would be the Los Angeles Chargers at 6-3. 3-0 record versus the West and 5-1 in the conference. 418 strength of schedule, 404 strength of victory. And then the last wild card spot, the number 7 seed, right now would go to the Jacksonville Jaguars at 5-3. 1-0 record versus the South, 3-1 in the AFC. 529 strength of schedule, 488 strength of victory. Then on the outside of the playoffs, sitting at number 8, just a half game out, are the Kansas City Chiefs at 5-4. 1-1 record versus the West, 2-3 in the AFC. They have a 507 strength of schedule and 357 strength of victory. Then you have a tie with the Houston Texans and Baltimore Ravens, both sitting at 3-5. Houston is 1-1 versus the South, 2-2 in the AFC. 597 strength of schedule, 385 strength of victory. while Baltimore, also 3-5, is 1-1, or rather 1-0 versus the North, and 2-3 in the conference. They have a 515 strength of schedule and a 360 strength of victory. And again, we'll get into the tiebreakers after we run down the entire conference. Number 11 is the Cincinnati Bengals at 3-6, currently 2.5 games out behind Jacksonville. 2-0 record in the North, 3-2 in the AFC, 541 strength of schedule, 500 strength of victory. The Las Vegas Raiders and the Cleveland Browns are both tied at 2-6. Vegas is 0-2 in the West and 2-4 against the conference. 557 strength of schedule, 444 strength of victory. While Cleveland is 0-3 against the North and 1-4 in the AFC. 515 strength of schedule, 441 strength of victory. Then at the bottom of the conference at number 14 are the Miami Dolphins at 2-7. 1-2 record versus the East, 1-6 in the AFC. 526 strength of schedule, 250 strength of victory. Number 15 is the New York Jets at 1-7. 0-2 versus the East, 1-4 in the AFC. 543 strength of schedule, 333 strength of victory. And at number 16 are the Tennessee Titans at 1-8, currently tied for the worst record in the NFL. 0-3 versus the South, 0-7 in the AFC, 623 strength of schedule, 375 strength of victory. All right, on to the AFC tiebreakers. Indianapolis would win the tiebreaker over both New England and Denver based on best win percentage in conference games. So you had a 6-1 record for the Colts within the conference. The Patriots and Broncos are both 4-2. New England would win the tiebreaker over Denver based on strength of victory, but not by a whole lot. They have a 333 strength of victory versus 325 for the Broncos. Then with the tie with the Texans and Ravens, Houston wins the tiebreaker over Baltimore based on head-to-head win percentage. They beat the Ravens earlier this year. So that puts Houston in 9th place and the Ravens in 10th. And Vegas wins the tiebreaker over Cleveland based on best win percentage in conference games. 2-4 record for the Raiders in the AFC and 1-4 for the Browns. Now to the NFC, where just like the AFC, the top 3 teams are tied for the best record in the conference. And that includes the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, leaders of the NFC East, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, leaders of the NFC South, and the Seattle Seahawks, leaders of the NFC West. All 3 teams sit with matching 6-2 records. All right. And again, we'll read all the tiebreakers off after we go through the conference. Philly is 2-1 versus the East and 5-1 in the NFC. They have a 514 strength of schedule and 520 strength of victory. Tampa Bay is 2-0 versus the South, 4-2 in the NFC. 470 strength of schedule and 400 strength of victory. And Seattle, also at 6-2, is 1-1 versus the West and 3-2 in the conference. 478 strength of schedule, 400 strength of victory. Right now, the 4 seed in the NFC would be the current North Division leaders, the Green Bay Packers, coming in with a record of 5-2-1. They are 1-0 versus the North, 3-1-1 in the NFC. 434 strength of schedule, 452 strength of victory. So those are your 4 division leaders as it sits right now. Philadelphia in the NFC East, Tampa Bay in the NFC South, Seattle in the NFC West, and Green Bay in the NFC North. As of right now, the Rams, 49ers, and Lions would have the 3 wild card spots in the NFC at the present time. Alright, Los Angeles is the top wild card, sitting in the number 5 spot with a record of 6-2. 0-1 versus the West, 1-2 in the NFC. 471 strength of schedule, 392 strength of victory. The San Francisco 49ers are the 6th seed presently with a record of 6-3. 3-0 record versus the West, 6-1 in the AFC, or rather the NFC. 473 strength of schedule, 420 strength of victory. And in the last playoff spot, that number 7 seed are the Detroit Lions at 5-3. 1-2 record versus the North, 2-2 in the NFC. 508 strength of schedule, 463 strength of victory. On the outside of the playoffs, presently you have the Chicago Bears, who match Detroit with the same 5-3 record. They are 0-2 in the North and 3-2 in the conference. 360 strength of schedule, 284 strength of victory. Then it's the Carolina Panthers sitting in the 9 spot at 5-4. 1-0 record versus the South, 3-1 in the AFC or the NFC. 480 strength of schedule, 357 strength of victory. In 10th are the Minnesota Vikings. 4-4 record, 2-0 versus the North, 2-2 in the NFC. 530 strength of schedule, 455 strength of victory. In 11th place, the Dallas Cowboys at 3-5-1. 2-1 record versus the East, 2-4-1 against the NFC. 493 strength of schedule, but only a 231 strength of victory. You have a tie with the Arizona Cardinals and the Atlanta Falcons. Alright, Arizona is 3-5, 0-2 versus the West, 3-3 in the conference. 500 strength of schedule and 352 strength of victory. Atlanta, also 3-5, is 0-2 in the South and 2-3 in the conference. 565 strength of schedule, 520 strength of victory. And then your bottom 3 has the Washington Commanders sitting in the 14th spot at 3-6. 1-1 record versus the East, 1-5 in the NFC. 500 strength of schedule, 385 strength of victory. 15 is the New York Giants at 2-7. 1-3 versus the East, 1-5 in the NFC. 551 strength of schedule, 706 strength of victory. And sitting in the cellar of the NFC are the New Orleans Saints, tying the Tennessee Titans for the worst record in the NFL at 1-8. They are 0-1 in the South and 1-6 in the NFC. 627 strength of schedule, 222 strength of victory. Alright, now reading off the tiebreakers for the NFC teams, starting with the 3-team tie-up atop the conference. Philadelphia wins the tiebreaker over both Seattle and Tampa based on best win percentage in conference games. 5-1 conference record for the Eagles, 4-2 for the Buccaneers, 3-2 for the Seahawks. What they didn't mention is Philadelphia also owns the head-to-head tiebreaker over Tampa Bay, as the Eagles beat them in Week 4. Alright. Tampa Bay wins the tiebreaker over Seattle based on head-to-head win percentage. meaning they have the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Seahawks following their game in Week 5. So that puts the Eagles at the number 1 spot. Tampa Bay is number 2 and Seattle is number 3. The Seahawks wins the tiebreaker over LA based on best win percentage in division games. 1-1 record in the division for the Seahawks. 0-1 record for the Los Angeles Rams. All right. As for that last playoff spot, Detroit owns it because of their head-to-head tiebreaker over Chicago. So the Lions would be in the playoffs as of right now. The Bears would not, despite their 5-3 record. And the last tiebreaker is with the Cardinals and the Falcons. Arizona wins the tiebreaker over Atlanta based on best win percentage in conference games. 3-3 versus 2-3. So this puts the Cardinals at number 12 and the Falcons at number 13. Okay, check this out. That's the NFL playoff picture going into week number 10. I was going to wait until tomorrow to do the college football playoff rankings, but I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and do that. It'll be less work for me to do tomorrow. Christian's in the house. What's up, Christian? All right, so here are the first college football playoff rankings of the 2025 season entering week number 11, released earlier tonight on ESPN. All right. So at the top, at number 1, are the Ohio State Buckeyes. With an 8-0, the Ohio State, number 1, I should say, is the Ohio State Buckeyes from the Big Ten with an 8-0 record. Last week, they defeated Penn State 38-14. This week, they are on the road at Purdue. At number 2, also from the Big Ten Conference, are the Indiana Hoosiers at 9-0. Last week, they destroyed Maryland 55-10. Their road trip continues in Happy Valley against Penn State. Then you have 4 SEC schools in a row. Texas A&M at number 3 with an 8-0 record. Alabama at number 4 with a 7-1 record. Georgia at number 5 with a 7-1 record. And Ole Miss at number 6 with an 8-1 record. Both Texas A&M and Alabama did not play last week. Georgia did and defeated Florida 24-20. So did Ole Miss as they beat South Carolina 30-14. This week, Texas A&M visits Missouri. Alabama has a night game against LSU. Georgia travels to Starkville to play Mississippi State. And Ole Miss has a non-conference game against the Citadel. All right, the next 2 teams will be playing each other. The BYU Cougars are at number 7 with an 8-0 record. They were off last week. And the Texas Tech Red Raiders at number 8 are 8-1, both teams representing the Big 12. The Raiders, of course, defeated Kansas State 43-20. These 2 teams will be playing on Saturday in Lubbock. At number 9, representing the Big 10, is Oregon at 7-1. They were off last week. They're back in action, visiting Iowa. And yes, the Hawkeyes did get ranked in the first CFP rankings. I'll tell you where in a little while. FBS Independent Notre Dame takes the number 10 spot with a 6-2 record. They defeated Boston College last week 25-10, and they will host a night game this week against Navy. Then you have a couple SEC teams next to each other. Texas at number 11, Oklahoma at number 12. Both teams 7-2. Texas last week defeated Vanderbilt 34-31, while Oklahoma won at Tennessee 33-27. Both teams are off this week. At number 13, repping the Big 12, is Utah at 7-2. They blew apart Cincinnati 45-14. They are also off this week. At number 14, representing the ACC, is Virginia at 8-1. They beat Cal on the road 31-21, and this week they're back home hosting Wake Forest. Number 15 is Louisville, also from the ACC, with a record of 7-1. They beat Virginia Tech in Blacksburg 28-16. This week they will host Cal, the team that just lost to Virginia. At 17, representing the ACC, is Georgia Tech, 8-1 record. They, of course, lost at NC State last week, 48-36. They are off this week. Number 18, also from the ACC, the Miami Hurricanes at 6-2. They lost 26-20 at SMU, which would give the Mustangs their first home win against an AP top 10 team since 1974. The Hurricanes hope their November swoon concludes this week when they host Syracuse. And then we have 3 consecutive teams from the Big Ten. USC at number 19 with a record of 6-2. Iowa at number 20, also with a record of 6-2. And Michigan at number 21 with a record of 7-2. The Trojans beat Nebraska 21-17 last week in Lincoln, and they're back home in the Coliseum hosting Northwestern. Iowa didn't play in Week 10, but they're back at it this week hosting 9th-ranked Oregon. That'll be a pretty good test for them. And Michigan won under the lights against Purdue last week, 21-16, and they are off this week. At number 22, representing the SEC, the Missouri Tigers, 6-2 record. They were off in Week 10. They're back at it with a test at home versus 3rd-ranked Texas A&M. Number 23, also from the Big Ten, the Washington Huskies, 6-2 record. They were also off in Week 10. This week, they're visiting Camp Randall to face the Wisconsin Badgers. Yeah, it's been a great season for the Hurricanes, but for some strange reason, under Mario Cristobal, they always seem to struggle in the month of November. Hence Saturday's loss at SMU. I think if Miami loses to a bad Syracuse team this week, you can pretty much kiss their playoff hopes goodbye. All right. At number 24, representing the ACC, are the Pittsburgh Panthers at 7-2. Last week, they won at Stanford 35-20, and they are off this week. And at number 25 from the SEC, you have the Tennessee Volunteers with a 6-3 record. They're pretty much out of the playoff race at this juncture, but they still ranked them in the CFP for some strange reason. That following Saturday's 33-27 home loss to Oklahoma, and the Vols are off this week. So looking at the breakdown, 4, 6, 7, you've got 9 teams from the SEC, including 6 of the top 12. 3, 4, 5, 6. The Big Ten got 7 teams in. The Big 12 only has 3. And the ACC has 5. This also includes Notre Dame, who is not in the conference but primarily plays ACC opponents, like Boston College, who they defeated last week. So as of right now, there are no group of 5 teams in the initial rankings. We'll see if that changes next week. Okay, that is it for the NFL playoff picture entering week 10 and the first college football playoff rankings of 2025, as again, Ohio State is still sitting in the top spot, and then Indiana completes the 1-2 punch at the top of the rankings for the Big Ten. All right, I will be back tomorrow with the week 9 edition of the week that was, as we'll look at team and player numbers from all 14 games from the past week in the NFL, plus my week 10 power rankings. I said week 10 edition, I meant week 9. So it's going to be the week 9 edition, and then following that, the week 10 power rankings. So make sure you join me for that. Like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell and get notified every time I go live. Big Al signing off. Thanks for watching and enjoy the pigskin. Peace out.